Thanks for coming. Thanks for having me here. This is the first time I think I've had a solo show in Indiana, and we are staying in Carmel, and so we drove through like 35 roundabouts. So I'm just glad that we're not still circling in a roundabout and that we actually made it here. But I want to start off by saying my undergrad professor, Ron Isaacs, had a thing that he said at Artist Talks, which is he felt like Artist Talks were a little bit like art magazines. The words are nice, but mostly I came to look at the pictures. So I feel a little similar, but so here goes. All of the work in this show represents, what you might say are three main directions or three main touch points or ideas. And the first one, which is probably more the drawings and maybe the large figures that are in blue, well, maybe to a lesser degree, but I was curated into a show called Frankensteinian, and it was a celebration of I think it was either the 75th or 100th anniversary of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I'm not sure, but that show was kind of got me started thinking about Frankenstein because I'd never read the book. And so for being involved in that show, I decided that I should take a look at the book, which I did. And there's a passage here that I'm going to just briefly read. It's just a short paragraph. But I think it really contextualizes some of the things that you're looking at here, especially the drawings in the other room. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishments of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. And so that's where the title of this show obviously comes, Convulsive Motion. And I got just sort of really interested in that idea of building this person or building this monster or building this creature. And so a lot of the drawings, and to some extent these paintings and the painting behind Lori, it's about sort of putting together a figure out of multiple figures or putting together a figure out of multiple parts. And that sort of idea or that sort of thread has run through several of the figurative paintings and figurative drawings that I've made. The second idea that you could probably guess at with all of the screaming heads and the titles, so that painting is called Deplorables, this painting is called Rally. These come from images of political rallies, and very particularly Trump rallies. And so I'm going to steer away from becoming overly political in my talking about it. But in my mind, when I saw those rallies, they seemed to me almost like a hillscape or some kind of Hieronymus Bosch vision of end times. You may not feel that way, that's cool. They also had to me a little bit of a feeling of kind of like, popular TV shows like The Walking Dead. And so these are from photographs of Trump rallies, and also, by the way, things that are not just Trump rallies. So like I was telling my friend here, some of them are actually people from like Beatles concerts. So, I dipped all the way back into the 60s. And it was just sort of interesting to me how people in sort of like this ecstatic vision of some powerful emotional grip kind of look the same. And so I just stuck figures together that were engaged in different activities, but that's where these some of these images come from. And then the third idea that I've been working with is around the same time, a little after the Trump rallies, my mother had an ischemic stroke, and if you don't know what that is, that's where, I guess I don't really exactly know what it is, but that's where there's a little blood vessel breakage, or there's a constriction of some sort. And so anyway, in her case, she lost the use of half of her body mostly. And so particularly the blue paintings, the paintings of these big figures hanging and dangling, they reference that. They have something to do with that. And so I want to say here, though, that this work is not about any of these three things in particular. I mean, they're not an illustration of any of those things. These things are sort of infusing my ideas. They're sort of with me in the studio when I'm working, but I'm not trying to depict one of those ideas in particular. So just as for example, those two blue paintings, which are some of the more recent figurative paintings, they're painted from life from a person who obviously didn't have a stroke. And so I'm sort of forcing the pose into that situation, so it kind of has a touch point of that, but it isn't necessarily directly that kind of thing. So I teach painting and art at the University of Kentucky, and I like to present my students with these two ideas about artistic genius, or where artistic ideas come from. And the first idea, I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, but Malcolm Gladwell talks about this idea of the 10,000 hour rule. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's this idea that if you spend 10,000 hours at anything, you're going to be, as he says, near genius level. And some of the examples that he gives in the book of the 10,000 hour rule is Wayne Gretzky, who's a hockey player. I'm making a sports commentary here, and I don't know anything about sports, but Wayne Gretzky is an example of somebody that he uses in the book because Wayne Gretzky obsessively watched hockey his entire life. And when he was a little kid, he would watch is it a game or a match? Whatever, over and over and over again. And if his parents would turn the match off, he would just cry unconsolably. And then he was the person who discovered that you could score a goal from behind the net. And it wasn't that he was the only person who could do that. He was the first person to think of that because of his involvement, and he spent so much time with the game. And Gladwell talks about Bill Gates would go to bed at night. His parents would think he was in bed, and then he would sneak out, and then he would go and code in the computer during a couple hour window at night where he was allowed to use the computer. And so these people and then the last example that I'll give is we like to think of Mozart as the genius. But Mozart, when he was 23, by the time he was 23, he had played the piano so much his hands were deformed. And so we like to think of this idea of genius as coming from labor, genius coming from time spent. And I like that idea too. So the other idea that I like to present to my students, just to see what they think, is the lady who wrote the book Eat, Pray, Love. Her name is Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know if she actually believes, but she says in her really wonderful TED Talk that she believes in the Muse, that she is literally visited by some entity that directs her to make her art. And Tom Waits, the musician, also believes this. There's a great story of Tom Waits sitting in traffic in LA, and he says he was visited by the Muse. He had this great idea, but he had no way to write it down. He had no way to record it. And so he spoke aloud to the Muse and said, I cannot do this right now. If you would like to exist, you're going to have to come back at a more opportune time, because I just can't do this right now. And then, and according to him, that did in fact happen. So when I was young and first starting out in art, I would have definitely picked the 10,000 hour rule. I mean, I definitely thought that was the way. But now that I'm getting a little bit older, I think maybe the Muse has a little more validity. And so why am I talking about this? It's because if we circle back to that idea in artist talks, I'm mostly here to look at the pictures, it's not always easy to say why you did the thing that you did. I used to think I was in total control of what I did in the studio. But now, I think half the time, I couldn't say why I did the thing that I did or why I painted it the way that I painted it. I mean, something that I've spent quite a lot of time considering in my own work in the last few years is why am I interested in just these ears? So like if you look at the painting behind Lori, if you look at some of the drawings in there, there are figures that are obliterated entirely except for their ears. And I do that over and over again, and I couldn't say why I do this. Or somebody asked me here when I did the Trump rally, why did I mummify the heads? And almost certainly it has something to do with Francis Bacon. Almost certainly it has something to do with Willem de Kooning. It almost certainly has something to do with abstract expressionism. It almost certainly has something to do with obliterating identity. Beyond that, I couldn't say more specifically. Why does that painting have blue drips? Some things are aesthetic. Some things you choose because it seems like it would look good or feels right in the moment, and some of those things are not always easy to identify. The other thing that I have always talked about in all of my artist statements, since pretty much for the last 15 years, I've always talked about this idea of beautiful and grotesque. So I'll read one other little blurb here from my own artist statement about this work. The limbs hang and dangle. Lines describe what is there and what is not there. The carved dark shapes, the backs of a hand and elbow are solidly described against a field of smoky, neutral, pale light. The lines arc towards the lurching bodies to lift or impede the weight. Figures are composed of mismatched proportions, hewn at the joints with fragile red lines. Identity is obscured in thickets of opaque, dark masses. In the vague, expressive dust of soot and pigment, rest forms uneasy in their shape, ungainly and uncomfortable. They are dark and emotional, sentimental even, and sometimes wretched in their form. They pay homage to the truth, but only fleetingly and uneven. In the spaces between truth and visual chaos, they are beautiful and grotesque. And that has been something that has always been with me in my work, that it almost has to have both of these things. And I can't really consider a thing done until it has a feeling of both of those things. And then the last thing that I will leave you with was on the same piece of paper. And that's a great quote by Zach Smith. If you don't know who Zach Smith was an artist who died pretty young, but he is sort of, I don't know if famous is quite the right word. So the last thing I'm going to end with is a Zach Smith quote. And Zach Smith was an artist who is known for making ink drawings for each page of the book Gravity's Rainbow. And then he died, and I can't remember what he died from, but if you're interested, it will be easy to find out. But anyway, here's the quote. Painters do that too. The one who lived near the mountain painted the mountain. The one who liked bullfights painted bullfights. The one who watched the light pass through the greasy glass and hit the orange peel on the kitchen counter painted the light passing through the greasy glass and hitting the orange peel on the kitchen counter. Not because they knew that looking closely at these things would tell them something, but because they hoped it would. And that is, that sort of sums it up in a really nice way. That, I think as artists, we do these things not because we know that they have meaning, but because we hope that they do. And that's it. Thank you.